Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat, the regular roundup of stuff I've read at some point in my past. I've got a whole bunch of books to talk about this week, so I am just going to crack on with it.
Sophie Vlogs.
I'm going to kick things off with Arthurian Romances by Chretien. This is a collection of medieval French Arthurian romances. It includes famous ones like The Knight of the Cart and The Story of the Grail. I read this over about 3 or 4 months because when I was really in the mood for it, it worked really, really well, and when I wasn't in the mood for it, I was not interested at all. It's been a really interesting reading experience. So I've been doing some Arthurian reading lately, just as a little topic exploration, and so I was really interested to read this because I know that the French tradition is where a lot of the Lancelot Guinevere stuff comes from and that kind of thing. And it was just really interesting because I've read some much older Arthurian stuff in this and also a lot of contemporary stuff, and it's always just very interesting to see what threads are picked up on and what the portrayal of concepts like chivalry and what makes a good knight, what those are. Different Arthurian threads focus on things that are important at that time. So I found this just a very interesting reading experience. It is sometimes funny, some of the ways that medieval humor is weaved in is genuinely funny. Sometimes it's funny but not in a deliberate way, just when you look at what narratives were like. Although there are a number of different tales within this, there is sort of a similarity between a lot of them in that you have usually a knight, they have some kind of task, they have clashes with other knights, there's usually fair damsels, stuff like this. It is extremely interesting seeing what views on morality is. This is definitely a novel that is outside of my comfort zone. I don't read a whole lot of medieval romances, so it was more of an interesting experience for me to have a look at what a particular time period's view on the Arthurian narratives were. Also interesting that a lot of them don't focus on Arthur at all. Lancelot is focused on, Percival is focused on, different books focus on different figures from Arthurian myths, some of which I feel are distinctly less popular now than they clearly were at this time. That's about all I'm going to say on this because I don't have a huge amount of feedback to give. It was a little bit of a challenge for me, but it's one I'm glad that I took on because I definitely feel like I have gained from reading it and I've gained some understanding. If you are someone who is more familiar with medieval romance and that kind of thing, I'd be really interested to hear if there are any other ones that you would recommend exploring. I have things on my radar like Geoffrey of Monmouth and stuff like that. Any recommendations always welcome. Kind of a novel that kind of fed into that because I ended up reading these at a similar time and I felt like they had some similar themes, is The Letter for the King by Tonke Dragt, which is a Dutch novel translated by Laura Watkinson. This is a middle grade novel from the 60s. We follow Turi, who is he is a squire, and it's on the night where he has to spend the whole night in this chapel with his other squires, and they have to spend the whole night in silent contemplation, and then in the morning, if they've got through it all without leaving or stuff like this, they will be knighted. But in the night, he hears a voice that is asking for help, and he investigates, and essentially he gets put on this quest where he has to take this message to a king of a different kingdom, and he goes off on this journey, and a lot of it is just he's not allowed to open the letter unless it's the direst of straits, and a lot of this is just him having to have faith and trust that his mission is the right one. And there's lots of mini episodes in this and that kind of thing. The reason why it kind of fed into my reading of this is because I felt like both of them have lots of little episodes. Both of these, although drastically different genres and time periods, we are always following a knight figure who is on a quest, but their quest sort of can be broken down into smaller little interactions they have that in many ways prove their worth as a knight. They get challenged by very, very bad people and they end up on top. The morality of The Letter for the King is very classic 60s fantasy children's writing to me. It reminded me a little bit of stuff like The Dark is Rising, like Narnia, like the good guys are very good and the bad guys are very obviously bad. There's no moral complexity beyond that, but at the same time it is still a fun read. I found portions of this narrative more interesting than other portions because, like, depending on what his particular, like, side questy thing at the time is. I definitely think that this was like a lovely classics children's novel. It's one that I think if I had read when I was younger would have been up there with like my favourite books at the time. Reading it as an adult occasionally, like, I did want just a little bit more than this very like simple morality that we were given, but that's what this is. So this was definitely like an interesting read, and I think that it fed into the other book quite interestingly. It was like a 60s middle grade take on very similar themes of like being a good knight and what that entails and all of that kind of thing. I also read this tiny little book that is The Old Man of the Moon by Shen. This is, it's described on the back as a moving 19th century account lost for many decades of a Chinese official's all-consuming love for his wife. And that's pretty much what it is. It's just this guy writing about his wife, like how they met, some of the things they did together. I actually thought his wife would be slightly more present than she sometimes was. A lot of this was not necessarily about his love for his wife, but it was kind of just about like their life together, some of the challenges they faced, some of like, and how they like overcame them / like just dealt with them. It was interesting as like a snapshot of this moment in time and of a particular like class experience of the time, because they're not upper class. He is a working man, he is a Chinese official, like he has to work in order to be able to like feed his family, that kind of thing. They like face difficulties like is he gonna get a concubine or not, that kind of thing. So it's not my favourite of these little like Penguin classics that I've read, but it was like an interesting little snapshot and a read that gave me like an insight into like a time period that I've not really read anything about. Next up are some graphic novels. This is Lord of Misrule by Pat Mills, Clint Langley, Greg Staples, Jim Murray. This is a Slaine comic. So Slaine is from 2000 AD, which is like a British sci-fi fantasy comic. Every issue of 2000 AD has like a bunch of different storylines in it. This has gathered one of Slaine's runs into one packet. My dad buys me these. Slaine is an interesting figure because it's all based on Irish mythology, and older runs of Slaine were all like based in that particular like mythological Irish setting. But then something that developed as like it went on is that actually he gets like reborn into different time periods because he's like the representative of the horned god, and he like acts on behalf of this goddess. And there's always like this recurring figure, like the enemy figure, who like as he grows in strength in different time periods, Slaine gets brought back to like deal with him. So it's a fun way of exploring different time periods each time. This one is set in the Norman period. It's kind of hodgepodging. Like, William the Conqueror has just died, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's kind of hodgepodging like William the Conqueror era Norman times, but with like like Robin Hood. Because essentially, like, you have to throw historical accuracy out the window for this, 100%. But it is a fun, like, positing where, like, Slaine has, like, this woman, Neve, who is, like, his one true love, who also gets reborn, but she doesn't remember him. And Neve, in this time, is, like, Lady Marion, who is a nun. And it's very classic Slaine. There's a lot of like violence and fighting, and in a way like the art style is sometimes quite grotesque because there are these like big monsters, and Slaine does this thing where he like warps into like a slightly grotesque being. Sometimes the art style really works to capture that grotesqueness. There are types of art style in this that works better for me than others. This is one of them. Like, I really like this person's art style because I'll put down below who they specifically are because I can't remember which one's which off the top of my head, but I feel like they do this like almost like airbrushed like this here, like almost like there aren't any hard lines, it's like airbrushed, it's almost got like a dreamy ethereal quality to it, and I really like that art style particularly because I think it taps into that kind of blending of history and mythology that Slaine does. The other art styles still work because in the action sequences it does work to have something that is more detailed and grotesque that ties into that sort of like violent aspect. It's just that's not the bit that like really I liked to look at. This wasn't my favourite one compared to some of the other ones. Like I liked the one where he's in the Celtic times and he's taking part in Boudicca's rebellion and that kind of thing. So Slaine is fun, it's violent, it's gruesome, it plays fast and loose with history, but it is always like a fun read. It's not always my favourite, like narratively, because I think sometimes this element of being reborn means that you get the same plot structure just in a slightly different execution. So it really comes down to like how is it executed as to whether or not I particularly rate it. I also read this single comic that is Batman's Secret Files, The Gardener. My friend bought this for me because I love Christian Ward. He is, who is the artist on this, he did Odyssey, which is one of my favourite graphic novel series, which is like a psychedelic, gender-bent reimagining of the Odyssey in space. It's fantastic. This follows, it kind of follows Poison Ivy, but it actually follows like this figure who is the gardener, who has, in this version, like, has a history with Poison Ivy, and she is trying to tell Batman how he needs to handle this situation, and it's actually got like a really sympathetic look at how Pamela became Poison Ivy, and like eco-terrorism versus trying to save the planet, like where does that line get drawn, that kind of thing. Just as some examples of the art style, this is why I love Christian Ward's art, because it's psychedelic, but also like I love how he sort of takes things out of frames. So there are frames, obviously, throughout this. Like this page is very classic, like rectangular framed boxes. But some of these pages, the way that things morph and are fluid and connected, I just think that like his art style is amazing. And then these page layouts, I just find them like really engaging. I find it really exciting to like read his work. So this was cool, this was interesting, it was a really fun take. I think it's kind of a one-shot, although from the end it does seem like there's going to be like another comic that's kind of going to follow up on some of the seeds planted in this gardening metaphor, yes. So if you're someone who is into Poison Ivy, I think this seems like a fun start point. Also, if you're someone who likes this art style, like, check out Odyssey, it's great. Finally, I just want to mention 2 books from my Kindle. The first one of those is The Empire of Gold by F.A. Chakraborty. I am not going to talk about this too much because A, it is the 3rd book in a trilogy and final book in a trilogy, so I don't want to spoil things too much. And B, kind of left it too long to review this, and now I can't remember my thoughts as well as I did at the time that I read it. Essentially, this is this fantasy world where our main character Nari was brought up in the human world, but then she gets swept away into like this world of like djinn and that kind of thing. Shenanigans have ensued, and now it's the final book of the series. There's a lot of different threads going on. My main point about this series is that I had a really great time reading it, and I did thoroughly enjoy this series. That said, I think it is slightly overlong for my taste. All 3 books are very chunky. I think this one was like 700 or something pages, and for all of them, I feel like they could be chunked down a bit and either make it 2 really long books or like 3 slightly shorter books. There is also some stuff to do with character development and actions and repercussions of actions that I am kind of still muddling out, and that's why I've put off recording this. Specifically to do with Ali, I think that his character I have some conflicted feelings on. On the whole, I think this is a series that would potentially be good to do a reread because I think that there are a lot of... It's very political in a way that I enjoy. I enjoy that it is this big tale and it's exploring lots of different people who have all of these histories with each other that involve exploitation and hurt and like how do you make peace when there has been so much wrong done on all sides. I think that is such a interesting thing to really dig your teeth into. So I understand why this series is long. I think sometimes the detours that we had, like I wanted us to explore some more like ramifications of things than necessarily like some of these like little plot sideways points that we got. I don't know. At the same time, can't deny that I had a really great time reading it, had a fun time. definitely one that I think I might reread at some point in the future. I would be really interested to hear your thoughts because I have seen some divisions. Like I've seen people who really really love how this series ended, and I've seen people who like have some real critiques of how it ended. So yeah, do let me know. The other one is just briefly, I want to mention The Confectioners Guild by Claire Luana, which I DNF'd specifically because it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and like what it is probably fine. It's not what I was looking for. So how this was billed to me was it was like a murder mystery with like magical baking, and I was like, hello, I'm here for it. So our main character, like she can bake. Like when she bakes, it like puts magic into the bakes that she makes. But then this person is like killed using one of her cupcakes, and it's like she's trying to prove her innocence. Someone else is trying to like prove that she's guilty. It kind of felt like it was developing more into like a romance rather than an actual mystery book. I felt like that was kind of being sidelined a bit, and also like some of the characters were acting in ways that I was like, this is a stupid way to act. So I got about like 20% of the way through and I DNF'd it because I just wasn't feeling it. But I just thought I would mention it. That's everything that I wanted to talk about this week. As per usual, I would love to hear your comments. If you have any, have you read these? Do you have thoughts on them? Anything like that, please do leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I hope you're having a lovely day and I will see you next time for something different.